Hello, everybody. We want to welcome you to our sixth DukeNY Career Conversation. I'm Leanne O, a 2015 graduate of the Pratt School and 2017 graduate school. We also have Phil McKenzie, who's the co-host today. He's a Fuqua 99 and also Duke New York board member. You may also recognize him because he was previously our speaker, and he also spearheads the Duke New York's Table for Six. As our speaker today, we are thrilled to have Lori Conkling, Global Head of Partnership, YouTube TV, and Google Fiber at Google today. Before we start, a little bit about Duke New York and our series. Duke New York's mission is to support our tri-state alumni throughout their forever Duke journey, be it through informative sessions like this today, in-person networking opportunities, or even just fun gatherings like hoop lunches. Making our Duke community stronger by fostering meaningful conversations, support, and connection helps to build the strong ties we need to create a community of inclusion and equality for all. And we know that during these challenging times, many of our alumni and students are losing jobs or in need of career and professional support more than ever. So thank you for being an active member of our Duke New York community and for taking the time to join our conversation this evening. A quick note before we begin it, our group chat is always open, so please submit questions there. And please turn on your video when we go into our Q&A session so that Laura can see you all. Now, Phil, handing it off to you.
Thank you so much, Leanne. I love getting an opportunity to be a part of this conversation, and I want to thank Lori, my classmate, for taking part in this. I was telling everybody it's warm in New York, so I brought out the summer linens. We're going to be festive as we have this conversation, so thanks so much for joining, Lori.
Thank you. I am excited to be here. Always great to see you, Phil, and looking forward to the conversation.
So we don't have a lot of time, and you've done so much that we have a lot to cover. But I want to transport us back to 1999 when we were graduating. Seems like just yesterday, but it was very long ago. And obviously at that time, 1999, we're graduating Fuqua, investment banking and consulting, and probably consumer product marketing were the three big areas. And you opted to go a completely different path and explore going into media. Like, what were some of the things that you were thinking about that prompted that decision?
So I had worked at the Walt Disney Company prior to Fuqua, and I had known, based on that experience, that media was an industry I was very passionate about. There were obviously, many different opportunities that were presented when we were students at Fuqua, and without question, there were three tracks that were, largely followed by our classmates. I actually did end up going the management consulting route initially out of business school, but I focused on the media practice with that consulting firm. I realized a couple years in that I missed being in-house at a media company, so I actually went back to the Walt Disney Company, but this time in New York, as opposed to pre-business school, I was in Los Angeles.
Awesome. And speaking of class of 99, many of our classmates have joined the call. I know they registered, so I want to give a special shout out to every one of our classmates from 99 who took the time to watch both of us have this conversation. So shout out to class of 99.
Their microphones are muted so they can't tell stories about us.
Exactly. No secrets until we're in private.
Right.
So fast forward to the present moment, you're at YouTube within the Google family. Walk us through a little bit of your day-to-day responsibilities, what you're focused on, what is it like being within YouTube?
So we are working on a television product within Google, and that is the area of the business that I'm a part of. So there are two television products within Alphabet, really, YouTube TV, which is part of YouTube, and Google Fiber, which is part of Alphabet. I am responsible for negotiating all of the content deals for those platforms, and it is everything from linear channels to on-demand channels to direct-to-consumer channels to working closely with my colleagues on the YouTube main side and making sure that we take a holistic approach to how media companies are distributing their content across the many platforms that Google offers, but specifically making sure that our television product has all of the content that subscribers are looking for so that we can continue to grow that business.
Now, You know, obviously one of the major things in the news cycle over the past couple of months has been COVID-19 and the pandemic. Content has become even more important as many of us have been sheltering at home to varying degrees. Have you seen a shift in your responsibility and the impact content is having over these past few months?
So probably not surprised, are seeing a spike in viewership on YouTube TV and our television products. People are home, they're watching more content, they're watching a lot more news, which makes sense because we're all trying to stay informed of everything going on. And, you know, a subscription television product, which is what we are, has become even more critical because the reason people generally to a live linear product is for news and sports. Clearly there's no sports, but as I mentioned, news is critical. So not only are we seeing a spike in viewership, we're also seeing our subscriber base grow.
Now, one of the things that I've been thinking about in preparing for this conversation is, you know, YouTube, Google, these were not even companies that existed when we were in business school, you know? So again, we're kind of dating ourselves, but even though we still look great, so much has changed. So much has changed over these years. And you know, you're working in a company that literally didn't exist. Like, what has been your thought process in terms of watching media shift so much over this time?
You know, it's what's funny is I remember when we were graduating and one of our classmates, you know, was kind of progressive in his thinking, and he was talking about, you know, tech companies which have gone on you know, to grow and become part of the mainstream. And what's been fascinating to me is exactly what you pointed out. You know, it's been this just complete, you know, evolution of how people are consuming content, interacting with friends, getting their news. And to be in the media industry through all of that has been fascinating in the sense of, when I worked at Disney, I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, if you're in media, like this is such an incredible company, you know, to work for. They've got such a strong brand and, you know, they're just really on the cutting edge of how they're delivering their content. And here we are. I mean, yes, it's been many years, but it hasn't been that many years. And it's just, I couldn't have even imagined what the media and entertainment industry would become. And it's largely because of the innovation that companies like Facebook and Google and, you know, Netflix and others have driven. And I, before joining Google a year ago, I was working at NBC Universal on digital businesses that we were basically looking at how to distribute NBC Universal content on digital platforms. And it just became so clear to me that so much of the value in that space was being, you know, basically driven by, you know, the FANG companies. And so I actively made it a mission to see if there could be an opportunity for me to grow my career at one of those companies. But it's an interesting transition to go from a traditional company to a tech company. And it's one that, you know, regardless of what stage you are in your career, it's a lesson that I learned in terms of, you know, constantly think about how you stay nimble, how you stay up to speed on trends, like how you think outside the box in terms of networking, and, you know, just really follow where your industry is going, see who you think is positioned well for future growth, and try and find a role within that company if it's interesting to you.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect transition to start to get into these ideas around networking and forever learning. You know, when language like digital, for us, you know, second year business school, it was a Palm Pilot. You know, that was like the hot item. Remember okay, Palm Pilot?
Please stop referencing products that make us sound like we're 90.
But it's awesome. I think those things are like magical to think about, right?
I totally agree.
You know, I miss playing chess and those games on that Palm Pilot. Life was so simple back then.
For reference, I think we need to share with everyone that when we were at Fuqua, first of all, it looked nothing like it does today. And our computer center, do you remember this? Had like maybe 10 computers and it was like the size of a closet.
Different times. Digital meant something completely different. But you touched on that idea of forever learning, right? Like that's been a major part of your career and the reason why you've had the longevity and success. What can you tell alums or even some current students that might be watching of some actionable items that they can use, particularly as we're in a moment of transition?
So first and foremost, I would say, just pay attention to how people are interacting with technology in whatever industry you're in. So for me, being in media, living in New York City, I would basically take the subway to work every day and I would see that everyone was starting to watch, content or basically scroll through social media on their commutes. And, you can really pick up a lot of like what kind of the mainstream population is doing, in my case, in regards to content by just observing. And then I started to see that a lot of people were actually, they just had, their earpods in, or AirPods in, or earbuds on the subway. And I'm like, oh, they're listening to a podcast. So like you start to just pay attention and you see what's going on. And one that helps inform, depending on what your job is, kind of what you might pursue from a strategic perspective in your job, but also it can help, inform just like what is taking place in general, such that you can start to see opportunities of potential growth that you might want to pursue. It's also just, a lot of, colleagues and friends that have, kids that are teenagers or high school, they often, will say like, oh, have you heard of this thing TikTok? Like they'll tell you what their kids are doing and you're like, okay, pay attention to that. So there's a lot of that. And then of course, you're reading the press, you're, paying attention to different informational sources that are available to you. And you start to see, again, trends or patterns of companies or technologies or distribution channels that consistently are starting to get discussed. In our case, it's basically the linear television ecosystem. A lot of people, have been leaving it because they're getting their content from direct-to-consumer services like a Disney Plus or CBS All Access. And so, it is our job to say, okay, well, we're in the television space, but if people are starting to, shift viewing patterns over, to different platforms, what would make sense, for YouTube or Google in regards to making sure that we are a company where however someone wants to consume content under whatever business model, we can offer that to them.
Amazing. I want to ask one more question before we shift it back to Leanne. Looking again, I'm going to take us a little bit back, but no particular references. What do you wish you knew in 1999 when we were leaving school that has been really applicable and vital to your career up until this point?
So I would say that I think, one of the things that I've really, really learned, in the last, call it 10 years, but maybe wasn't as aware when we were graduating from business school, is that finding a career that is in line with what you are naturally interested in and passionate about is critical to being fulfilled with your career, and I think really helps accelerate success. And we touched on this a little bit in the very beginning, and that is, there can be established tracks that are set out for people in business school or, any other school. And you can basically look around and say, oh my gosh, all my classmates are doing one of these three things, I should be doing that. In my case, I realized pretty early on that, consulting is an amazing training ground. You learn so much, and it's a great, great, great experience that I had. But my passion was in operating a media business, like being in-house, rolling up your sleeves, getting, into the granular details of the strategy. And, when I made that move back to Disney, I took a pay cut and technically a title cut. But it put me on the path that it put me back on the path that I was really passionate about. And and then that's become even clearer to me, you know, in the last couple of years, that, you know, I just love, it's not even, you know, so much the media industry. It's like, I love this idea of content and entertaining people and informing people. And so that's taken me down different roads, but like, I know what gets me excited and I stick to that.
That's great. And that's a perfect transition to hand it back over to Leanne to take over the back half of the conversation. And I'll go back to hanging out and just listening and learning like everybody else. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Phil.
And thank you so much, Lori, for sharing your background and like all the nuances in terms of what you've done. As we go into this 15-minute period where we have Q&A, we'd like to encourage everybody to turn on your video. So come back, Phil, so that everybody can see each other and this could be an engaging conversation. Also, we really like to suggest everybody and encourage everybody to send in questions, anything that you want to learn from our amazing speaker today during this 15-minute period. We've also been getting a lot of questions beforehand, and so I have them populated. So to start off, the first question we got from a participant was, what advice would you have for someone with sales experience in finance who would like to transition to the tech industry?
So the good news is that there are a lot of sales and finance opportunities within the tech industry. And obviously, you know, I think there's a broader question in there, which I hope I'm reading correctly for the question or interpreting correctly. The transition from traditional media to tech, or not even media, traditional companies to tech, as with many, you know, other career opportunities that will present, it comes through your network. And you really need to, your current job, you know, find work on digital businesses or tech-driven businesses, because you people at companies that you might want to work at that are tech plays, companies, what have you, and you can leverage those relationships and the fact that the type of work that you do to get your foot in the door at those companies. I will also say the way Google found me is, as I had mentioned, on digital businesses at NBC Universal. So I definitely knew people at YouTube, and one of the people that I had worked with on a partnership recommended me for this job. And so it was just, you know, a very clear, it emphasizes, you know, that point of, you can never network, you can always network in interesting ways, but the direct relationship is always going to be your best bet.
Thank you. So a question from Kevin Wu is, how much data is Google mining from consumers, and how much information from that content is put out there? And I think more so, I think maybe Kevin is interested in learning more about like, how can one leverage a Duke network to kind of learn more about positions like that involve this kind of information?
So, you know, Google, one of the things that has been so admirable about Google is just how careful they are with data, and they're really strict, you know, privacy guidelines. You know, I work on the television side, and, you know, part of what we will look at is, you know, what are people watching? Because as we canvas the portfolio of content that's available to license, we're trying to make sure that it's in line with what people want to see. So if we're finding that a lot of our subscribers are watching sports, then we can say what other sports opportunities could be interesting in terms of bringing different networks into the portfolio. But it's, you know, again, I think all of us in all of our jobs, you know, we're trying to make sure, we're walking a very fine line, but we're trying to make sure that in this world we live in, we can make informed decisions based on what, you know, we see our customers appreciate.
Perfect. Another question we got was, any tips for effectively communicating your value for an opportunity that is not aligned 100% with your past experience?
Wait, can you ask that one more time? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so do you have any tips for effectively communicating your value for an opportunity that is not 100% aligned with your past experience?
Yes.
So I think it's more like in terms of pivoting your career, like how do you do that effectively? How do you convince someone to give you a chance?
So one thing I'll say is I feel like if an opportunity you're pursuing is 100% in line with your past experience, then you found a unicorn. Because basically many jobs, will have a foundation that might be rooted in what you've done, but, will have different elements, that are either a stretch or a growth opportunity, or something along those lines. And, this job is directionally in line with what I've done in the past. I did distribution on the content side for Disney, A&E, and Lifetime Television. But what I'm doing now is I'm actually buying the content and working on content deals for a distributor as opposed to for a content company. So like how I parlayed that was, obviously if you understand the motivation and the objectives of the content company in a deal, then when you're negotiating with them, you will have a very strategic way of looking at that partnership because you've been on that side, you've sat in that chair, you know what's important. And now I'm on the distributor side and I know what's important, to us. And so you can, basically take that skill set and see if you can create win-win situations out of that. I also think, you, again, depending on what the job is, like if there is it may not be that your entire job was directly aligned with what you're, trying to do, but there were elements or a specific project or, my advice is just always make it real, always make it concrete and tangible. I think one of the hardest things for anyone who's interviewing someone to really grasp is if, people are giving theoretical or conceptual or very high level answers. And you're like, but can you operate in this job, in this culture, even if you've done it like 2 or 3 times, that's okay, but just tell me about those 2 or 3 times.
Great, thank you. So we have another participant question, which is regards to education. So I'd love to learn about the shift of education online during the pandemic and YouTube's role or larger trends regarding creating media for students and children.
So basically, that's more of the YouTube main side of the business. And we have been spending a lot of time, putting content that is kid-friendly, family-friendly on the platform because kids, just like I was saying, YouTube TV viewership is up. Kids are home. Kids have time. Kids are online. They're watching social media. And so we want to make sure that there's a very broad offering for them. In addition, as I also mentioned, like news viewership is way up, and obviously people are very focused on COVID and trying to understand what's going on. And so YouTube Main has also been very, very focused on that. I think days blur a little bit, but I think it was like 2 months ago, a person was hired to oversee health for all of YouTube. Because it's clear that we need to have a very strong executive, looking at that vertical and making sure that we're offering content that is, important for people to be able to access. And we continue to just constantly, again, look at what's going on in the world and see how we can expand our offering, curate how people find opportunities to discover new things. And so like on YouTube, once you finish a video, another video plays. And so, it's really just important to make sure that when people are watching something on YouTube, we continue to just have options for them depending on what their interest is and what they want to see.
Great. So I got another question. So you talk a lot about following your passion, aligning yourself with what you're passionate in. For you, like what is a recent event that reaffirmed your passion in media? Like what have you done recently that made you realize like, wow, I'm so glad that this is what I chose my life to do and be in?
So when I, like am reading the news, obviously I'll read world events, what's going on in the country, but I always will find myself like just looking through industry news, catching up on different shows and movies and music and podcasts. Like I just find the industry and the content aspect of it so interesting. Whereas, there are other industries that, I definitely recognize the importance of, but I'm not naturally gravitating towards like seeing everything that's going on in that industry. I just like this idea, as I said, of entertaining people. And so I think you just know, like if you think of your extracurricular activities, like I love to go to the movies. I love to, see Broadway shows. I love all of that. And so like, what do you just naturally like to do? And that is, I think, a good indicator of what you might be passionate about.
Great. So I know a lot of people from your class have been, cheering you and Phil on, asking questions. So I think this kind of touches on something that you brought up, but in your opinion, like, what are some takeaways that current Fuqua MBA students could really hear and listen from and learn from your personal experience?
So, I mean, I think being a current student right now, networking is probably more important than ever. And, as a lot of companies have to put a hold on hiring and, reassess kind of how long we're going to be in a situation, where people are working from home and different industries might be pulling back on advertising or things like that. Like, spend this time reaching out to, people that are in industries that you're interested in and seeing if you can do a Zoom call. And get, very specific around what you want to do. Because just as I was saying, when you're interviewing someone, if people are talking about their experience very conceptually and not, really connecting the dots for you as to why they're the right candidate for the job, it's the same thing in networking. Like, I really, really, really recommend that, before you get on that Zoom call with someone, you know how you're going to frame what you want to do, what your ask is, and do a little bit of research on the company so that you can mention one or two things that might have recently been in the news, so that person immediately is like, okay, they understand what the objectives of the company are, and they're paying attention to what we're doing.
Great. And maybe on a last note, and going back to your experience at Fuqua, and I didn't go to Fuqua, so I don't truly understand this question, but when is YouTube TV going to carry the Fuqua vision?
Oh my gosh, I completely understand this question. So just basically at Fuqua, it was every Friday night. Was it every Friday night? I think it was. We basically would have short films that students created, basically aired or shown on a screen for all of the students, and they are hilarious. In fact, I just went to my reunion. I won't say how many years, although you can easily figure that out because we graduated in 1999. 100 years ago, when we went to Fuqua, we just had our reunion, and they showed some of the Fuqua Vision videos from way back when. First of all, you want to talk about the impact technology has had on society, all you have to do is go and watch Fuqua Vision films from 1999 and you'll realize that special effects and everyone having an iPhone and all of that just did not exist. So that's hilarious. But I will say this to answer the question. YouTube TV needs a 24/7 linear channel, but I'm sure YouTube Main would love to have some of those videos uploaded.
Then just last to add on to that, so what is an upcoming content or show from Google Fiber or YouTube TV that it should not be missed or is on your next go-to watch for you, Lori?
Well, so so YouTube TV basically carries the linear channels from CBS and Disney and Viacom, Viacom, CBS, Disney, Fox, NBCU, and then we've got all the sports networks and all of that. So the question is really like, what show, you know, am I excited about or have I been watching? I will say this, I watch a lot of Bravo, which is ridiculous in the sense of, it's not ridiculous. I used to work at NBC Universal. It's owned by NBC Universal, but it is definitely a network that I find has shows where at the end of a long work from home day, you can be really, really entertained. And also because, as I shared before we started, I am working out on Long Island. And if you watch something like The Real Housewives of New York City, you get to see what life was like pre-COVID, and they're going to all the places that you used to go to. So it's just kind of a fun, you know, thing to watch. But I will also say, not on linear television, two shows that I've watched that I thought were really, really good. One was on Netflix, and it was Ozark. That season finale, the finale of season 3 is crazy. And then I also really like The Morning Show on Apple.
Well, thank you, everybody. And Lori, thank you so much for being our speaker today and sharing your amazing background. Just for everybody who joined, as y'all may know, we've had 6 amazing speakers so far, coming from all different backgrounds to serve and educate our Duke New York community. Next week, we'll be hosting Koshi Nardi from class of 2002, Director of Operations and Engagement at The Wirecutter, which is a New York Times company. All our career conversations have been recorded and posted on our Duke New York LinkedIn page. So please go on the page and be able to reconnect with all the alums there. Also, we'd like to encourage everybody to utilize our Duke New York LinkedIn page. So if you have any questions, want to network, or even have job postings, we encourage our community to be using it so that it serves the whole community and hopefully hire talented people from our school. So anyways, thank you again for everybody joining during this time. And Lori, thank you so much. Everybody have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.